Hey there, my name is Joe Gilder from HomeStudioCorner.com. I am good friends with my buddy Graham Cochran. We've run dueling mixes together and done podcasts together. We've been buddies since the beginning. So when he asked me to do an overview video of Studio One for you, I said absolutely. If you've never heard of me, no problem. I've been using Studio One as of shooting this video for 6, 7, 8 years now. So I've been using it since version 1. As I'm shooting this video, we're on version 4. But don't let that stop you if you're watching this a year in the future and they've released version 5 or version 6. The thing about software, especially audio software, is the stuff that was kind of the crucial, the way the system works, that stuff doesn't really change. PreSonus is especially good about fixing bugs and adding new features that users request. So that stuff will be different. There'll be new features that aren't in this video today. But don't let that stop you. I've done videos on a series of videos on version 1 that people still refer to now that version 4 is out, because the basic functionality of the DAW hasn't really changed. It's the same with Pro Tools. When I used Pro Tools, I started on version 6 something. The last version I used, I think, was 10 or 11. And a lot of the basic functionality was the same. They'd added new features. It looked a little different. A few things had moved to different places, but overall it was the same software. If you knew how to use it in version 6, it would not take you long to translate that into version 12 or whatever. So, while I know software videos can never remain completely timeless, I think that there might be a little bit of an exception with audio programs, because they do maintain their main functionality. Okay, enough about that. If you're interested, before we dive in something free for me to kind of help you with your mixing, I know you're a member of Graham's Mixing University. I've got a free, very short, but pretty punchy PDF that you can have. It's a guide called 5-Step Mix Guide. Probably a good complement to the stuff you're already learning from Graham, but you can have it absolutely free. Just go to 5stepmix.com. That'll get you on my email list if you're into that sort of thing, and I will send you an email with the download link for the PDF, and you can read that while you're watching this video. I'm kidding. Pay attention to the video, grab a cup of coffee. We're going to dive in and go over some of the core functionality of Studio One, which I believe is a really fantastic DAW. And I need to start with, I'm going to show you a lot of cool stuff in Studio One. Nothing like major super ninja tricks, but just the core functionality of how it works, assuming you are either new to recording and mixing in general, or you've used another DAW and you've switched to Studio One. If you have, great. I would encourage you to stop switching now. What I mean is, I've known people who switch from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and they spend so much of their time learning software that they're not actually making music. Now, if you are just into software and you like learning new software and that makes you happy, great. Go for it. May the force be with you. But if you are more interested in making music, but you know that you tend to get bogged down in little details like software choices, I would say you've got a piece of software in front of you, whether you're using a limited version of Studio One or the full professional version like I have here. You absolutely have everything you need to make great sounding music. So don't be a switchaholic who's always switching softwares in hopes that it will make him or her better. The only way to improve you is to improve you. The tools make a difference, but not as big of a difference as improving yourself, okay? Okay. All right, so a couple things to know about Studio One. Let's just dive right in. Everything in Studio One kind of is centered around these 3 buttons on the top right hand of your page, okay? These have been integral from the beginning. Now, if you have the artist version or maybe even the Prime version, you won't have this project page. So start and song are the main 2 things we're going to focus on. Project is for mastering. So there's videos out there on that. I'm not going to dive into that much, probably at all, in this video, because that's a whole separate thing. It looks different. It behaves similar, but it's for mastering, not for recording and mixing. The song page is how you get to your songs, and then start page is where it begins, which is what you see in front of you. Got a list of recent files here. You can separate these if you want. I never do this into songs and projects. So if I just want to look at stuff that I've mastered recently, you can see I haven't done a lot of mastering lately. You can go through and see those. There's a place for an artist profile. If you are the artist, I'll put my name here, Joe Gilder. There's a place for your SoundCloud stuff. I never do anything on SoundCloud, so it's just kind of there. And then down here, this is one place when you're starting out, when you've maybe first opened Studio One, down here is a place where you're going to want to pay attention. This is showing you what audio device you're using on the system. So when you first open Studio One, chances are it's going to say something like boink. It's going to look something like this. It's going to say built-in output, which means it's just using the whatever audio, the headphone jack on your computer or whatever, and that's how it's going to default. More than likely, hopefully, you are using some sort of audio interface that's plugged into your computer via FireWire, USB, Thunderbolt, something like that. So you want to go select that here. And so once you select it here, it's going to should just kind of remember that selection forever in the future. So you just come in, playback device, recording device, these are all one and the same. I'm choosing my audio interface. Now, my audio interface happens to be a mixer. It's a digital mixer, but as far as the computer is concerned, it's a normal audio interface just like yours. If you don't have a mixer, you're not missing anything. It's going to look just like some sort of 24-channel rack-mounted audio interface. But that is my audio interface of choice. So I select that, and it sets it as both the playback and the recording device. We are good to go. Now, device block size. Let's just go through some of these settings while we're here. This is the boring stuff. I'll get to more fun stuff in a minute, but you got to kind of wade through the boring sometimes. This is also known in other systems as your buffer setting. So if you plan to do a lot of recording, you may know from previous experience that if you have your buffer set to something really high, like 2048, that's really high, 4096, or even as high as maybe 256, when you record, you'll hear this delay. You'll sing a note, and then you'll hear it come back just ever so slightly later. And it's super annoying. Right here, at 2048 samples, you can see the latency is about 45 milliseconds. That's essentially useless. The way we solve that is we go to a lower sample. Now, what this means is how much time, how many samples does it take for my voice to come into the computer and to come back out my headphones so I can hear it? In a perfect world, that would be instantaneous, which is one of the reasons why I use a mixer, but if you don't have a mixer, you're totally fine. You would just do something like this. You would set it to a lower sample setting, a lower buffer. So 2 to 3 milliseconds, that's usually fine. Most people can't really hear. 64 usually sounds fine to me. It's less than 4 milliseconds. There's a little bit of a delay, but it's completely usable and doable, okay? And the idea was when you're recording, you go with a low buffer, and when you're mixing or doing anything else, you go with a higher buffer. You're giving the computer more time essentially to process the audio. So sometimes when you go with a really low buffer, sometimes the computer can start to have to work really hard to keep up because it's having to move really quickly. Versus a higher buffer, we're giving it literally a buffer, a number of samples that it has to do what it needs to do before it needs to spit it back out so we can hear it. That's what that's for. Sample rate. This is setting the sample rate on your audio interface. Mine happens to be locked at 48 kilohertz. Your normal settings are 44.1 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz. There's also 88.2 and 96, and you can go crazy with 192, and there's others. I do everything at 48 or 44.1. The higher sample rates, in my opinion, don't do anything but just make your files bigger, and there's no real audible difference. Now, if you want to test it out and see for yourself, go for it. Or if you just want to take my word for it and stick with 44.1 or 48K, that's great too. Release devices in the background, no clue what that means. Let's go through a few more settings here. Dropout protection, I assume that needs to be maximum so that there's no like dropouts in the audio while it's playing back. This is kind of the same thing we set before. I don't really understand this. I set it to double 64-bit, and that seems to be fine. Nothing else we can adjust here. Let me just go through the other settings really quickly. I'm not going to go through every button and switch because that's super boring, but just the ones that I go to normally. Appearance, this allows you to change the way the mixer looks. Let me show you that really quickly because it is kind of interesting. Let's pull up this. Maybe I have to close this. Let me open up the song, and we'll open the settings tab back up. To get to your preferences and your settings and all that fun stuff, you can come up here to the menu, or there are keyboard shortcuts for everything, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But on the Mac, it's Command, comma. We'll pull up this window, and it looks like it keeps the last window you had open visible, which is kind of cool. So general, there's lots of different settings here. Under appearance, this allows you to, if I go back to the mixer, you can see it. Mine's very colorful. I like it colorful. I know I make certain tracks certain colors, so I know if I'm looking for the vocals, for example, lead vocals, I can scroll, and when I see yellow, bam, I've got my lead vocal. It's nice to have that there. So they've given you the option of kind of adjusting how things look. So you can have things different colors. You can go basically you can kind of customize the look. It doesn't change it crazy, but stuff like this makes everything really light. So if you don't like the dark submarine color, which I kind of like the dark submarine color, you can make adjustments to that, which is kind of cool. And same thing for the arrangement window. So the mixing and the arranger window are completely separate. You can do the bright thing on that one as well. So lots of things here. You can kind of mess with that. I usually set that up once and I forget about it, okay? Keyboard shortcuts. You can get to it here in settings. You can also get to it up here under the main menu there. I've set up a keyboard shortcut for keyboard shortcuts because I use keyboard shortcuts a lot. Here's the cool thing about keyboard shortcuts. You can go nuts mapping things and making things exactly like you want them to be. I would encourage you to use the shortcuts as they're set up in Studio One. It does give you the option here to basically import, a different keyboard mapping scheme. So you could set it to Pro Tools, and that would essentially if you're a Pro Tools user, all the keyboard shortcuts or a lot of the ones you're used to would kind of be ported over. So Command Spacebar, for example, would start and stop recording, which is what you're used to in Pro Tools. I would recommend, if you're gonna use Studio One, use it as they intended it to be used, because it operates differently. And in my opinion, it took some getting used to, but I decided to stick with learning their shortcuts, and it felt really intuitive. And then if there was a certain feature that I use a lot, for example, opening up the keyboard shortcut menu, then Studio One allows you to create custom shortcuts. Now, just file this away in your brain for later. I don't think you should dive into this too soon. Get used to the way it works, and then if you find yourself doing the same sort of functions over and over and you wish, man, it'd be great if there was a keyboard shortcut for this, which would make you a lot faster over time, having more keyboard shortcuts, then you can come and set those up. So for example, I wanted a keyboard shortcut for opening up the keyboard shortcut menu. So you come over here, you do the search, and I just was looking for shortcut. Okay, here it is. Keyboard shortcuts. I think that's the one. And then I just come over here, and I figured out, let's make it Option K. So I held down the keyboard shortcut. It says there it is, and it tells me that it doesn't tell me that someone else is using that. If I did Command Q or something, it would say, oh, that's actually already assigned to quit. I don't think I want to use that. So it'll tell you if you're doing things that are, that are already mapped to something else, so you don't accidentally overmap something. So I thought Command or Option K works, assign, boom, that is my keyboard shortcut I can apply, and that will be saved in my settings forever, which is super cool. One thing I do also that's kind of neat is, yes, save these settings. Under Location in the Preferences, if you look under right here, where all the user data is stored, you can see mine is stored in my working hard drive, which is where all my projects go. And in that folder, if I show you, actually, let me just come over here and look at it real quick. Here's that folder, and here's that. Inside that folder, you have things like installer, macros, presets. I think. I want to say all the keyboard shortcuts are stored in here as well. So if you move to a new computer, just be sure to copy this file over to the new computer and then tell Studio One, hey, this is where all my Studio One information lives, and now it'll have all the same custom keyboard shortcuts that you created on your old system. So I've done that before. Works great. Auto save documents. That's a good one to have. It'll just automatically basically just hit save for you every 5 minutes. Sometimes it acts funny, but I think they fixed that problem so that if you're working along for an hour and then power goes out at your house, you'll only have lost the last 5 minutes because the system will have saved it automatically for you every 5 minutes. Super, super cool. This, I always say yes. Studio One defaults to, if I copy some files into a song, like when I'm importing files for a mix, for example, it'll default to just reading those files off of whatever folder I copied them out of. But what I always want it to do is to copy it into the new folder for that song. Okay, that's the way all Pro Tools works. It automatically does that. For some reason, Studio One gives you the option. I like to set it to ask me every time so I can say, yes, absolutely copy those in. All right, let me go back to the General tab here. Network, touch input, no use for those. Yes, save all the changes. All right, locations, we talked through that. None of this stuff really matters. You can have it scan for new plugins at startup, which I would say yes, because if you install a new plugin bundle, you would like that to show up when you open your DAW the next time. Audio setup, we've already been through. This was the window that we looked at right at the beginning where we set up the audio device and we looked at the different bit rates and buffer settings and all that. Remember, device block size is another code word for buffer. I don't know why they didn't just call it buffer. External devices, if you have external devices plugged in, they will show up here. I'll never use this setting. And advanced is kind of cool. This is some stuff that I'll probably refer back to later in the video, depending. But there's a few cool things here. And these are all kind of preference things. You can take a screenshot of this and kind of see which ones I have selected. Like this one, Colorize track controls. You can have it to where the control, I don't know what that's changing. Let me apply. Okay, so you can see up here, see how these tracks that are listed, if I turn off that setting, they go to being gray, so they're not actually matching the color of the track. Well, I'd rather them match the color of the track. It's just little things like that. Why that's not under the other window we were in earlier with the different color settings, I don't know, but here it is. So if you're ever looking for a setting, come into this advanced and click through these tabs. Chances are what you're looking for is in here. Anything of note here? Most of this is just default for me. Pre-record audio input. This is kind of fun. So in Pro Tools, this was called, I think, Quick Punch. And basically, whenever a track was ready to record, let's say I wanted to punch in a guitar part, and I hit record right on the downbeat where I want to start playing. But then I realized I wanted to record a little bit before that. This setting allows you to do that. It's essentially always recording the last 5 seconds before the record button was pressed. So if I record something and I realize, oh, I hit the record button a little too late, I can drag the file back and not have lost that performance, which is super cool. The rest of this stuff is just not that important. You can kind of read through it yourself. Colorize channel strips. This is the big one. If you didn't want your channels to have color and you just wanted the color down at the bottom, but you wanted everything else to be gray and sad, you could do that. But I don't like that at all. And this is fader mode. It has touch and jump. And I want to say Studio One defaults to jump. I do not like jump. Jump is this thing where if I accidentally click right here, see how the fader jumped right to where I clicked? I don't want that. I'm accidentally clicking all the time. I don't want to have to worry about accidentally messing up my volume. So instead, I recommend setting it to touch, which means if I touch over here, nothing happens. I've just touched the fader. I can click and drag, and that doesn't even do anything. I have to actually go to the fader and move it up and down if I want to move something. Okay, that just makes more sense. I don't know why the jump's there. These are all just not that important. They make a difference, but it's just not worth talking about right here. Services is nothing. Okay, so we've gone through a lot of the boring stuff. And some of the basic setting stuff. So now let's dive into some of the basic features inside of Studio One. Let's create a new track. So let's assume this session is blank. Better yet, let's just create a blank new session so I can walk you through that. Create new song. So you'll hear people call it sessions. That's what Pro Tools calls it. Song is all it is. When you open up this window, there's actually a lot of stuff you can do before you ever create the song. You can set the name of the song, which we'll set it to Joe Loves Graham Cakes. You can choose where to save the song. It defaults to that folder I showed you earlier, but you can save it anywhere. If I have a certain album I'm working on, I'll save all those to the album folder instead of to this generic songs folder, but you've got lots of options there. And then over here on the left-hand side, you've got templates. Now, these are templates that I've created. My mix template, for example, has a drum bus and some plugins in place that I know I always want to use, and a reverb and a delay and things like that. If you search my YouTube channel for mix template, you'll see I have a video about my template, and you can download that template as well. So do a search for that. It's free, and you'll be able to download that if you want to check it out. But it allows you to kind of, once you get used to the way Studio One works, you can start creating your own templates of things that you like to have. And then separate from the template, which is types of tracks and buses and plugins and things, over here on the right-hand side, you can still individually set your sample rate, your resolution, and other settings for that particular song. Again, sample rate 48, 24-bit, I would stick it to 24-bit. 16 bits, just not as good as 24. 32-bit float confuses me. 24 bits, good to go. You'll be fine at that. Time-based, I want it to be based on bars, like the lines across the top of the page are in bars, like bar 1, bar 2, or in seconds. Usually I'm in bars because I'm doing stuff to a certain tempo. Song length I never mess with. Tempo, do you know the tempo of the song already? If so, go ahead and enter that here. And the one we're going to work on I think is 132 BPM, so I'll go ahead and put that there. Time signature. I don't know why it defaults to 12/4. That's ridiculous. But I'll say 4/4, and then you can even set the key of the song. Look at that, which I never mess with. Stretch audio files to song tempo. I never selected this because I'm not doing any work like that. Play overlaps. I always have that off as well. So now that I've selected everything I need to select, I'm going to just create an empty song with nothing in it. Let's hit OK. And now we've got our song. So very blank, very empty. There is nothing to see here. And let's kind of build some things out and show you a few things that you'll need to know. From a recording standpoint, I know that you're mostly watching this because you're into mixing, but obviously if you're going to mix something, you will have had to record it at some point. So I'll talk you through a little bit of that. Let's create a new track. So the shortcut for creating tracks is the letter T. It pulls up this window. That is pretty powerful, allows us to do lots of things. We can name the track. We'll call this vocal. Let's call it Vox because that's cool. We can decide what type of track. Audio is exactly what you expect it to be. Either a stereo or mono audio file on which you can record audio from a microphone or a guitar and a bass, things like that. Instrument. This is a MIDI instrument track. It kind of is a combination of a MIDI track with an instrument track where you can put some sort of virtual instrument like a lot of the ones included in Studio One, or your favorite native instruments or Easy Drummer or something like that will come onto an instrument track. Automation track and a folder track. I don't use those, so we're not worried about those. How many tracks do you want to create? We can create 1. We can create 40. It'll create them all exactly how you want them. Now, pack folder, if you have more than one track, you can pack them into a folder. Different DAWs, some people love folders. I think folks who use Cubase a lot seem to like the folder idea. So basically, you can have a lot of tracks that you can kind of condense, not condense. Yeah, you kind of condense down into one track, and you can expand it and see everything inside and then condense it back down. I almost never use folders, so we're going to leave that alone as well. Auto color versus choosing the color for the track. It's going to be a vocal, so we're going to make it bright yellow. We'll make 3 tracks just for fun. Mono or stereo. Now, if you don't know the difference between these, both Graham and I have videos on our channels about that. Mono is a single channel, stereo is 2 channels. So from a recording standpoint, I've got a single microphone in front of me, a single cable, so that's a mono signal. So there's no reason to record vocals on a stereo track because I'm using one microphone. So I will set it to mono. Preset, these are presets of plugins. I never use them in this context, so don't worry about that. And here's the input. Now, you can change all this, just about all this stuff. You can change a track from mono to stereo. You can change the inputs and the outputs of the track, the color of the track, and all that inside the session once it's created. But if you wanted to create it beforehand, you can do that here. So if I want all these tracks to have the same input, my mic is plugged into input 3, I can do that. Now, if I have 3 tracks and I want them to be inputs 3, 4, and 5, I can click that ascending button, and it'll just automatically set those up. It's nice little handy things like that that I never use, but it's nice to know that they're there. And then the output will default to main output, which is correct for most purposes. That's just your main. Usually, it's outputs 1 and 2 of your audio interface. Okay. So when we hit OK, whoosh, we'll see that we have created 3 audio tracks. Now, real quickly, I do this a lot. You can adjust the height of these tracks to fill up your screen more. A couple ways to do that. Look down here on the bottom left. There's default settings where you can just click and it'll just make them huge if you want them to be. There's also this little guy, which you can click and drag. And if you see when I zoom out, it allows you to change the height of everything kind of uniformly. Excuse me. You can also do this. Let's say you've got 3 tracks, but you want the first one to be the biggest. You can always come up here and just hover over the edge and pull it down and make it. You can make them all different sizes if you want. Then as soon as you go to adjust this down here, they will now all be the same size and will adjust together. One thing that I do, if you're using a Mac, it's Command and then just scroll your mouse up and down. And it allows me to quickly zoom in and out vertically and make the tracks larger or smaller as I need. I do that all the time. If you're on a PC, I believe that would be Control Scroll, but you'll have to play with that a little bit and figure that out. Okay, so we've got tracks created, and this is our arrange window. And you may want to check out the mixer window? Well, there's a couple ways to do that. You can click mix down here on the bottom right, which you should never do. You should use your keyboard shortcut, which in most cases is F3. So boink, I hit F3 on my keyboard. Here's my mixer window. You may think that's too short. Everything in Studio One is adjustable. I can adjust the height of this window to be as big as the screen or be super small like that. And then I can adjust the height of this section, which has my sends section. So if you're familiar with sends, this is how I can, for example, send the vocal to a reverb and things like that. For some reason, they default to being hidden right there, but I like to bring them up. I can also make the faders really big. It's really modular, which I love about it. But this is, let me see, about like this. This is about how I like to have it. I can see the plugins, I can see the sends, and I can see the tracks, but I can still see a lot of stuff up here in the arrange window as well. You have a lot of options here. A couple places I want to draw your attention to. If there's something that's acting wonky and you're not sure what it is within your session, there are these little wrenches here on the mixer window and up here in the arrange window. A lot of times those have some pretty valuable information. So if you click on this, it gives you some settings. Now some of these are settings that are also available in the preferences windows that I've shown you before, but this just allows you to get access to some of them. For example, colorize the track controls. We already went over that, but it's also right here. So these are, if you find something's being weird, you can come in and quickly make some selections there. Also over here in the mix window, same deal. There's just some settings that some people like and some people don't. So I'd encourage you to kind of mess around with these. Like channel notes, for example. I don't use channel notes a lot, but when you turn that on, you get these channel notes down at the bottom of the track. Pro Tools users use that a lot. I used to use it, and then Studio One didn't have it for a long time, and now it does, but I just don't use them very much. But they're available. You can make them visible or not, depending on if you want them. I/O connections. That's this right here. Here's my input, here's my output. Like every DAW I've ever used, inputs on top, outputs on bottom. But for some reason, if you don't want to see it, you can do that. Or you can click that little setting over here on under the wrench that hides it for some reason. I guess just to make things less visually cluttered. I'm not sure. Excuse me. So these are here. As you become more familiar with Studio One, if there's something that irks you, there's a chance it has irked someone else before and they've requested it to be fixed, and you can come up here and fix it. Now, here's a little setting. You can get to this in a couple places. I didn't show it to you in preferences, but I'll show it to you now, where it says I/O. If you're familiar with DAWs and audio workstations, that stands for input-output. This takes us to our I/O setup. Now, this is for whatever reason, they have this in a separate place from the normal preferences. So here's the preferences window, and then down here, for some reason at the bottom, there's a song setup button, and that takes you to this new preferences window that gives you general settings for the song itself, meta information where we can put the artist's name. You know, Graham's coming over to record his new hit record. Put the name of the song, I Love Joe. Name of album, I Love Joe Part 2. Like we can do, or I guess it would be more like Volume 2. And we'll leave that misspelled because Graham doesn't know how to spell. Put album artwork. You can do a lot of things here. It saves with the song if you export it as an MP3, for example, but otherwise it's just kind of just there in case you want to use it. But here's the more important one. Yes, let's save these settings. Audio I/O setup. If you've used DAWs before, digital audio workstations, recording software, you've probably seen this before. This is basically just a big grid, and mine's bigger than most because I have so many inputs and outputs available on this big mixer that I have. But this basically shows us all the inputs and outputs available and what's routed to them, basically. So you can set this up and customize this as much as you want. I can delete all of these if I want and get rid of them and start from scratch, or I can add more on the end if I want. So as you can see, the way I have it set up here, inputs 1 through 24, I've created these mono sources over here. And then I've selected, okay, across the top, these are things that I can't change. These are hardwired to the audio interface. My audio interface has, we're under the inputs tab, there's inputs and outputs. My audio interface has 32 inputs on there. That's crazy. 24 mic inputs and then a bunch of other inputs as well. Then it's got a few additional inputs. So there's just a lot to choose from here. I can basically customize this. This is kind of a virtual patch bay where I can set it up to be super straight like this, where there's an input for every track. So input 1 through 24, and you can see on the grid, each of these are designated correctly. Or if I know one, for example, channel 12 on my mixer, that's what I've got my 11 rack plugged into, which is a guitar amp processor. So I can name that 11 rack, which means if I come over here to a track and I go to set the input for it, let's just show you that real quick. That grid determines what shows up here under inputs. So if this was a guitar track, for example, when I click input, it shows me all the inputs that I just set up in that IO setup page. So as you can see here, it shows this channel 12 is named 11 rack. If you have a lot of outboard equipment and you have it kind of hardwired into certain inputs on your interface, this is a way to be able to quickly patch whatever one you want to go into whatever track without having to crawl around behind your desk and plug and unplug things all the time. Super, super handy. And again, you can get to it right here by clicking the IO setup. This can all be saved. It can be saved into your basic preferences. It can be saved on a song basis. It can be saved into a template. There's a lot of options here. One thing to note is you have to create channels both for mono and stereo. So I've got 1 through 24 mono inputs, and then I did the same thing 1 through 24 stereo, where I just literally click down here, add stereo, and then now it sets them up in groups of 2 as opposed to 1. So my Motif keyboard, for example, is plugged into these inputs here. What is that? Channels 13 and 14, and I've got that labeled. So when I want to record that, I don't have to go remember, oh, what is that plugged into? I think it's 13 and 14. I can look, and the name will be right there. So these are your inputs. This is where you'll spend most of your time, if you spend any time in here at all, is setting up your inputs. Outputs, on the other hand, are a lot simpler usually. If you're just basically just recording and everything's coming out, just your main outputs 1 and 2, your main left and right outputs of your audio interface, then you literally would just say main out, and you just select what channel that is. For most people, this will be set to channels 1 and 2. Because your interface may only have 2 outputs or 4 outputs or something like that. Channels 1 and 2 are usually the correct outputs. For me, mine's a little different. I do something like, no, I think 1 and 2 are my outputs. This is an old template, but yeah, where does that go? Anyway, that's good. So I'll hit apply, and we'll get out of here. So those settings are what show up here. Here is where I set the input for this particular track. Here is where I set the output. A couple of cool things, just while I'm thinking about it. The way tracks work in Studio One is really intuitive. What won me over, so I was a Pro Tools guy. I worked for a company that worked for PreSonus, and so I needed to learn Studio One just in order to do some training around it and to sell it. And the more I learned it, the more I used it. I used it to learn it, and then I kind of fell in love with it and started using it exclusively over time. And the thing that won me over, there was no one big thing that won me over. It was just a lot of little stuff. So, for example, when if I want to select 2 tracks, I can hold down. If I want to select all 3 tracks, I can hold down Shift and click the 3rd track, and they're all selected. No big deal, right? But then I can just go move a fader, and they will all move together. I think it doesn't work with panning, but it works with the faders. So in Pro Tools, you had to group those together before you could do that. Maybe I don't want to go through the hassle of creating a group. I just want to take these and move them right now and then not have to worry about that again. In Pro Tools, you have to select these, create a group, which I just did, Command G. Then you could come in, whenever you clicked on one of them, all 3 would move because they're grouped, but then you had to ungroup them to get rid of it. It's just annoying. So instead of that, you can literally just select them and move things around. A couple other things. If you want the fader to go back to 0, hold down Command and click on it, and it'll go back to 0. And if you want to make fine adjustments with it, I believe you have to hold down Shift. So I'm at 0, and I want to turn it down just a little bit, and I'm afraid the normal movement is just too much. I can hold down Shift, and then I can drag normally, but look, it's taking it down just a 1/2 decibel, sorry, 1/10 of a decibel at a time. So I can make really fine adjustments. That applies here, plugins, panners, really everywhere. When I hold down Shift, it goes nice and slow and smooth. When I let go of Shift on my keyboard, it starts to move around like crazy, okay? You can also enter the actual volume level. If you know, this fader was at negative 16.7 and that was perfect, and you want to set the other one to the exact same thing, you can click on it, copy and paste it, or you can click over here and literally type it in. Almost anything in Studio One can be clicked and adjusted. If I want to pan this left 45, L45, boom, it just pans it 45 to the left. It's pretty neat. And if I want it back to its default state, this works for plugins, really everywhere. Just hold down Command and click, and everything goes back to its original state, 0 usually. Okay. I can click and drag tracks to change their order. It's just as simple as literally clicking somewhere on the track and dragging it. And I can also do a couple other cool things. So let's say I want to create a vocal bus for these 3 vocal tracks. I can select all of them. In Pro Tools, you'd have to create a bus and then route all the tracks to that bus, or at least it used to be. I think they fixed it since. But in Studio One, it's super easy. I just select them all, right-click. And by the way, if I want to select the first and the third one, just hold down Command. If I hold down Shift, it selects everything in between. If I hold down Command, it lets me just select one at a time. Right-click, come over here, Add Bus for Selected Channels. Boom. It creates a bus. All of these have been routed to Bus 1. This is Bus 1. It just created automatically. And Bus 1 is now routed to the main output. Now I can change the name of this and call it Vox Bus. Now, if you're not familiar with buses, basically all of these faders are now running through this one. So if I turn this one all the way down, you won't hear the vocals anymore. If I mute this, you won't hear the vocals. If I solo it, though, you will, if the fader's up, hear all of these vocals soloed by themselves. You don't have to set up solo safe. You don't have to do anything like that. If I solo this vocal, it automatically will solo the bus so we can hear it. It's a really intuitive way this thing works. Is there anything else on the channels? Obviously, you have the mute button, the solo button. This is the record button. Ooh, now we can hear myself twice. That's that latency I was talking about before. And then here's the monitor button that essentially does the same thing. If you want to hear yourself, hear the microphone through the system without having to record it, you just want to listen to it and practice, for example, you can use that button. You can also set it up to... Actually, no, we're good. We're good with that. Over here in the editor window, one other thing that has basically all the same controls. You can see here's vocal 1. I can see the input. I can't see the output, but I can change the input here, which is kind of helpful for recording. This is the group setting. If I have them all grouped together, that would show up here. I can always double-click and rename tracks, and I can also hit Tab to go between them. So Tab and Shift-Tab will go between. If I decided, no, this isn't a vocal, this is a background vocal, 1, I can go through and change those really quickly without ever having to touch my mouse by just hitting Tab. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I wanted you to just know what's available, and then you can remember bits of it and figure some of it out yourself. All the same buttons here. You can still hear me when I talk with the latency. By the way, let me show you that really quickly. We talked about how if you set the audio setup to a lower sample like this, how there won't be any latency. Let's see if that's true. I'm going to mute my microphone that you're hearing now, and you'll hear me through the system. And there it is. There's a slightest bit of delay for me, but I could probably sing from that. If we wanted to go even, there's a little feedback, even. Now that's even faster. It's still got a little bit of a delay to it. I haven't completely figured it out because, yeah, now there's no latency at all. Okay, so here's another thing. This is new to Studio One. This button right here on the master fader on the right-hand side, my main output, enables low latency. I'm not entirely sure what that does, but when I click it, let me do it like this. When I click it, you can hear there's a little bit of latency there, and now there's none. So I wonder if I can set this to something like a high buffer. So a high buffer, and then I can... It's interesting. The option went away. Huh. I've never actually used that setting before. So if I go down to something like 64 samples, now that little button's there. I click it, and now I'm hearing it. So honestly, I'll be completely honest with you. I don't... Let me turn that off. Sorry. I don't completely understand how that works. Because I record with a mixer, I never actually listen through my software. And you may do the same. Maybe you have an audio interface that lets you listen directly off the box itself without having to route it through the system. If so, you can do that actually pretty easily. Let me show you how I do that because it might apply to you. I can hit record, and I'm hearing myself come back through the system. I don't want to hear through the system. I just want to hear it off of my audio interface. Okay, that's the way I want it to set up. This is where this handy little wrench comes to the rescue. If I go to, excuse me, let's see, monitoring follows record. I think that's the setting. Check. Nope. Let's check. Now remember, there is this really neat feature called monitoring mutes playback, tape style. I don't exactly remember what that does, other than it makes this setting work. So when you're listening to me and I hit record, you hear the delay. If I turn that off, now you don't. So now we're just hearing me off of my mixer, off of my audio interface, and we're not hearing me coming through Studio One, which is helpful because of that latency that was there. So there's a couple of different ways to work with latency. There's that Z button that we had before. There's this, if you're going to monitor off your system, you have an Apollo interface from Universal Audio, and it has its own mixer, Q mix for you, and you don't want to hear playback from the system, you can do it this way. Now, if you want to hear it really quickly, you can still click this button, which allows you to monitor, but you can also have them be independent of one another, which is the way I use it. So you can see that there's level there. You're hearing me from the mixer itself. You're not actually hearing me. You'll see there's no level coming out the main output of my Studio One session, because I've got that setting set that way. Does that make sense? I know it's a little confusing, but when you work with Studio One for a while, you'll realize, oh, that's what he was talking about. Okay, so those are the basics. If you select all the tracks and you do things, oh, here's something really cool. There's really simple keyboard shortcuts for Studio One. I've got all these tracks selected, and I want to record enable them. So I want to press the red record button. I can just press R on my keyboard, and look, they're all lit up, ready to go. Press it again, and they're all not record enabled. I can also press up and down on my keyboard and do them one at a time. So we're going to record a vocal here, la la la, and then I can stop recording. I can press down, R, and then I have a keyboard shortcut for record. La 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 la. Right? It's ridiculous, but I can press R to unenable that track, press down, press R to enable the next one. It's really intuitive. Like, you don't necessarily need an audio interface or some sort of control surface to do a lot of the cool stuff. They've made it very intuitive, which I love. So it also works for S for solo, M for mute. It's really, really intuitive. I want to select all these and mute them really quickly. I just press M. Boom, goes the dynamite. It's super awesome. Very, very cool. Stuff like that is what really won me over to Studio One, as silly as that sounds. Now, let's say you're mixing a song. Let me do that really quickly. Let me just pull in some tracks and show you a couple of things. We'll delete this as well. Right, I can't see anymore. Remove track. That took me way longer than it should have. That's embarrassing. I've got a folder over here with a bunch of tracks. So let's just drag them in. So this is literally how easy it is in Studio One. I can come over here, get rid of my mixer window for a second. I can grab all these tracks from a folder and just drag them in. Boom. And it's going to start creating tracks for them. It automatically made them this beautiful rainbow color. And in just a second, you will see all the audio waveforms for all the files. So we can zoom in, see everything. It's rendering all of them right now. We can see what they are. When I hit save, it's going to ask me, do you want to copy these external files to the media folder? That means, do I want to take them out of the folder they're in right now and copy them into the song folder for this session? And the answer should always be yes, okay? I'm going to say no just because it's going to take too much time. But it'll take a few seconds to copy that over. And then I've got all the songs in the right session. So I can quickly set things up and rearrange them in the order that I want. So for example, if I want kick drum at the top, I can just drag it up to the top. We can do that here, or we can do that down in the mixer window. And I like to hide some of these things over here, so I'm just seeing the mixer and the tracks and things like that. So let me quickly put all my drums together and show you just a couple more things from a setup perspective, mixing perspective, things that you'd want to know how to do pretty quickly. And then a lot of this stuff you'll be able to figure out on your own kind of as you dive in. You're going to have to spend time with the software to get really comfortable with it, but I'm going to show you a couple of things that should make you happy and get you on your way. So here are the basic drum tracks: kick, snare, toms, hi-hat, overhead, and rooms. So if I select all of these, I select the kick, I hold down shift, and I click down to the bottom track, which is the room track. Now they're all selected. Now I can do a couple of things. For one, I can make them all the same color. So let's make them all something crazy. this nice bright green color. Okay, now, ooh, I don't like that as much as I thought I would. Let's just go with classic blue. So now they're all blue. And I'm going to make these a different color to make my point. Okay, these are green. Now I've got all my drums here. Another thing you may want to do is create buses for these. I already showed you how to do that. I can hit add bus for selected channels, and I can call this drums. Now all my drums are coming through this channel. Super, super cool. Now I can put a plugin on this channel and process my drums as a whole, and I can also put plugins on the individual channel. I can do sends, all that fun stuff. Speaking of plugins and sends, let me quickly show you. We'll just use this drum track as an example. Let me just get a quick mix on these drums real quick. Okay, they're already pretty balanced. That sounds fine to me. Now, let's say we want to do something to these drums. I'm going to hide the rest of these tracks just because they're visually really cluttering everything. A couple ways to hide tracks. You can select them all, right-click a track, and choose hide, and they'll just be hidden, and you can always get them back. The way I like to do it is right up here. This is similar to what happens in Pro Tools. There's a track list. If you click that little button, it shows all your tracks, and there's a little circle next to all the ones that are visible, and they're usually all visible. If I want to click and drag on that circle, it hides all of those tracks. So they're grayed out over here. I no longer see them in my session. Sometimes if you're just wanting to work on drums for a little bit, you just need get rid of some visual clutter, or you have some old tracks that you don't want to use anymore, but you don't want to delete them because you may want to go back to them at some point, but you don't want to see them right now. All that's available to you there. Okay, so now I've got my drums. I'll solo them so we don't hear anything else. And let's say I want to add some plugins. So the plugin window, if you press F7, it will pull up this window over here. Now you can organize this a number of different ways, but this is one of the things that I love about Studio One. When they first introduced Studio One, I didn't love it. I thought it was a weird feature. But then the more I used it, the more I really liked it. And it's this feature of drag and drop. So in the olden days, and most other systems that you use, let's say I want to put a compressor on my drum kit. I come over to my drum bus, I click the plus sign, and then I scroll until I find the plugin that I want, and I select it. It's fine. It just takes a lot of time. You do that 100 times over the course of a mix, it's just boring, right? Studio One allows you to keep a list of plugins over here on the right-hand side. Now, they're organized however you want them. I have them organized by vendor. I mostly use the PreSonus stock plugins anyway, and you can even set up a folder of just your favorites, which are these up here with the star next to them. So I can say, I want to use the Fat Channel plugin, which has some cool compressors on there. I click it, and then I just drag it to where I want it. I want it here on my drum bus. Boom. It puts it on the bus, it opens it for me, and I can start tweaking. It's that quick. Find it, drag it where you want it, and go. I know that seems like a marketing ploy, but it really does speed up the workflow, and it feels more creative to me. And that's important. It doesn't change the sound quality, but it's a feature that's one of those small things that makes me happy. So let's say I'll change this to the classic comp, turn it on, and let's compress this thing. And let's do a little EQ too. Great, sounds amazing. Here's the before, here's the after. So just with one plugin that has an EQ and a compressor on it, which is called Fat Channel, a lot of these plugins are included with Studio One Professional. You don't, like this compressor's not, it's an extra one, but this EQ is, and it's really, really great. It's kind of a Neve-ish EQ. All that's available to you. Up here is the power button for the plugin. I can turn it on and off by just clicking that button. You can also do that. That's the bypass button. I just use the power button. You can automate the bypass button, but I usually use power when I'm messing around with stuff and turning it on and off, because I can also turn it on and off here, right from here. I don't have to hold down any buttons. I don't have to do any crazy shortcuts. I can just click here, and turn that plugin on and off, or turn off a whole series of plugins. Let's say I put that on there, plus some other EQ and some other compressor plugin. I can very quickly turn them all on or off with one click, which is super cool. Okay. If I don't want all those plugins anymore, I can remove all of them, or I can remove them individually by just clicking on the little arrow next to them and removing them. Okay. Now the same thing works for the sends, only it does one extra thing. So let's say I want to send this drum kit, the overall drum kit, to a room reverb. Well, I'll come find the room reverb plugin. There's one in here called room reverb. I can click on it, and guess what? It actually gives me a bunch of presets. So I'm going to use this as a send effects. I'm going to go into this category, and I'm going to pull up some sort of a plate. One called flat plate. Yeah, this one right here. Now, I'm going to drag this flat plate to the send section right here on my drum bus. And look what happens. So I'm going to drop it right here. Now, it did a couple of things for me. It added a send to this track. It created a whole new track called an effects track that has the room reverb plugin with the preset I just selected already on there and ready to go, and it has it routed to the main output, and it set the name of the track to room reverb. That's incredible. So now all I have to do, I drag that, I hit play. Now it's too boomy of a reverb. What can I do? Well, I can add some EQ after it. So let's go up here, we'll scroll up, find the Pro EQ, drag it onto the reverb track, and do this. Now, a couple things. This may not look like you're used to seeing if you've used sends before. This is the volume level for the send. If you hold down Command and click it, it will go to 0, which is unity. And this is the pan. A lot of people don't realize that. So you can pan left and right. Same thing, you can hold down Shift to do very fine adjustments, or you can hold down Command and click it to go to 0. But this allows me to adjust how much of this track I am sending to that reverb. And then this button here allows me to make it a pre-fader send, meaning if I set it to this and I decide to turn the drums down entirely, it's still sending the exact same amount of reverb to, or sound, the exact same level to the reverb. I use that occasionally. Most of the time I leave it to the default, which is a post-fader send. Okie dokie. So that's the real basics. I mean, there's lots of plugins included. You can learn a lot at how to use them. Real quickly, I'll show you the default Studio One EQ is fabulous. It works really well. The default compressor, which is called, you guessed it, compressor, is also very cool. And one of the great things I like about Studio One, their compressor and a few other plugins include a mix knob, which allows me to compress the signal like normal, or if I want to compress it and then mix in half the compressed signal and half the uncompressed signal, kind of a parallel compression thing, I can do that there super easily. If I did that on the drums, for example, it can be a really cool thing, especially on drums. Let's do that real quick. Let me turn off the reverb because I don't need that. So it's too compressed. It's too much kind of snappy grossness. But if I pull the mix down, then we're only hearing some of the compressed signal against the other signal that we already had there. So we get some of the benefits of that compression, that the room sound, the kind of the tail of the compression, without all that nastiness on the front end, because we're hearing some of the dry signal as well. Super cool feature. That's one of those things you'll explore more as you go. Is there anything else? When you're ready to mix your song down and let's say export it to send it to the client or to just go listen in your car, a couple of things to know. First thing, when you start your song, at some point you want to come up here to the top left and click this little flag. That opens the marker track. Markers are where you do a couple of things. One is where you put markers. So for example, this is where the chorus is. I hit Shift Y, and that allows me to add markers just like every other DAW. Then you can click and drag them around. You can press delete to delete them and move them as needed. But there's also these start-end markers that are always there. These mark where the song starts and ends from an exporting standpoint. So this song, for example, I guess it starts here. Okay, so this song starts way over here at bar 9. So maybe I want to bring the start flag just a little before bar 9. You'll notice how it's snapping to the grid here. That's a normal feature. If you want to turn that off, this is the setting. It's called snap. You can press the letter N on your keyboard to turn that on and off. So now I can drag this very precisely to exactly where I want it to go, right there. And that is my start point, and then I can set my end point wherever I want it as well. This is where when I go to export this song to send it to Dropbox or wherever I want to go to listen to it, put it into iTunes, it's going to start from there. If you don't change this, then your song's going to have this big gap at the beginning, or like it was before, this big gap at the end. That's just annoying and unprofessional. So get used to having the start and end markers set up in your session so your session knows where the song starts and ends. Kind of makes sense. Now, to export the song, you're going to come up here to Song in the menu, Export Mixdown, or Command E is the shortcut. And this just pulls up a quick little window. We can name the song. What was the name of this song again? I can't remember. Joe Loves Graham Cakes. So JLG Mix 1. Okay. We can choose where it's going to go. For me, this is kind of fun. I put it in a bucket. This is just a folder in Dropbox. And when it goes there, I can hit export. And then when I open the Dropbox app on my phone, it's right there. Super cool. So I can say, let's export this as an MP3, 320K MP3. Those are good quality. Between the song start and the end marker, use the main outputs. Good to go. Okay. And then what happens, you can see, it will now export this, not in real time, but it actually exports it faster than real time, which is super cool and handy and neat. We'll see that clipping has occurred. That's because I haven't set levels on this yet. I've not done anything to the mix, so that's a problem, of course. But it lets you know, so you can go back and make some changes before you work on the mix. Couple of quick things. If you are exporting just to listen and you want to get it nice and loud for just for listening as if it was mastered, you can use the limiter right here. Just put it on your main bus right here. This is your main mix bus. Sometimes you can refer to it as a master fader. Put a limiter on there. Pull the ceiling down to like -1. You can go further if you want. On this one, I'll do just that. Just put a limiter on there at -1. I can hit export like I did before. And now guess what? It's not going to be clipping because the limiter is stopping it from clipping. Not the best way to work. You want to make sure it's not clipping before you put the limiter on there. But just to show you that the limiter does actually work. And it is included, at least in the professional version. I don't know if it's in the artist version, to be honest. There's a lot more you can explore inside of this DAW, but I've given you hopefully enough overview to get you excited and to get you started. You could start mixing a song given what you've watched in this video today. And then the possibilities are endless. I've got lots of videos on YouTube. I've been using Studio One for so many years now. You can see me do just about everything. I even have a series of videos. They're a little bit older, but look for them on my YouTube channel, Home Studio Corner. On Studio One, there's just dives into a few more kind of fun features and stuff that you may not know about or I wasn't able to get to in this video. As you can imagine, I've probably just scratched the surface, but you're in pretty good shape to get rolling. And I hope you feel more at home in Studio One and able to dive in and start working on some mixes and putting the reps in so that you can get better and start making some better music. So thank you so much for watching. Appreciate your time. Hope this was valuable for you. And again, if you want that 5-step mix guide that I created, it's absolutely free. Just go to 5stepmix.com. Be my pleasure to send that to you. And that's it for me. Thanks for watching. See ya.